The ballroom shimmered under cascading crystal chandeliers, each prism scattering warm golden light across polished marble floors. Silk gowns swept past tailored tuxedos. Laughter floated through the air like champagne bubbles. It was the kind of private charity gala where influence mattered more than invitations, and the guest list read like a financial empire's blueprint. At the center of the front row sat a woman known for commanding rooms without raising her voice. Diamond bracelet, custom couture, the kind of confidence built on generational wealth and aggressive acquisitions. Staff moved quickly when she glanced their way. Tonight, her name carried weight. She had funded nearly a third of the event. As she approached her reserved table, her smile faltered. Someone was seated in her chair, an older man, round glasses, dark suit slightly understated compared to the glitter around him. He sat calmly, studying the stage program as if the world around him were quieter than it was. She stopped beside him. "I believe you're in the wrong seat," she said smoothly, though the edge in her tone cut through the music. The man looked up slowly. His expression was relaxed, almost gentle. "Oh, I was told this was available," he replied in a low, steady voice. Several nearby guests shifted, uncomfortably. A waiter froze mid-step. "This section is reserved," she continued, her smile tightening, "for principal donors." There it was, the distinction. The man studied her for a brief moment. No defensiveness, no embarrassment, just quiet observation. "If there's been a mistake, I'm happy to move," he said, beginning to rise. She nodded toward security with a subtle gesture, not dramatic enough to cause a scene, but deliberate enough to ensure compliance. He stood. A passing executive halted abruptly. His eyes widened. Another guest leaned forward and whispered something urgent. A ripple passed through the front tables. The executive swallowed and spoke carefully. "Ma'am, that's Ozzy Osbourne." The air shifted, conversations dimmed. A photographer lowered his camera, but the woman didn't react the way the room expected. She didn't gasp, she didn't apologize. Instead, she gave a polite, dismissive smile. "I'm aware of who he is," she replied coolly. "That doesn't change the seating arrangement." Across the ballroom, a tall man had just stepped through the entrance doors, her husband, and he had seen everything. The music continued, but the melody felt distant now, like background noise to something far more electric unfolding at the front of the room. Her husband moved quickly across the marble floor, adjusting his cufflinks as he approached. He was used to walking into high-pressure negotiations, to diffusing tension between CEOs and board members. But this was different. The atmosphere felt heavier. "What's going on?" he asked quietly, positioning himself beside his wife. She kept her posture elegant, chin lifted. "There's been a seating confusion," she replied. "It's handled." Handled. The older man stood calmly a few feet away, hands loosely folded. No protest, no spectacle. Security hovered nearby, uncertain. Her husband turned toward the man, prepared to offer a polite but firm redirection. Then he looked closer. "The guy?" Glasses. The unmistakable voice he'd just heard moments ago. The presence. Recognition didn't hit him all at once. It crept in, like a memory surfacing from deep water. His brows furrowed. "I'm sorry," he said slowly, studying the man's face. "Have we met before?" The room stilled further. Even the waitstaff sensed something was shifting. The man gave a small, almost hesitant smile. "It's possible," he replied. "It was a long time ago." That voice, her husband's breath, caught just slightly, a flash of sterile white lights, the smell of antiseptic, the sound of frantic shouting. His mind pulled him somewhere else, back to a private investment summit overseas. Back to the night everything had gone wrong. He remembered collapsing, the sharp pain in his chest, the dizziness, the chaos that followed, people backing away, phones raised instead of hands offered, and then someone kneeling beside him, a steady voice cutting through panic. "Stay with me." His heart began pounding now, not from illness but from realization. He stepped closer to the man. I know that voice," he murmured. His wife looked between them, confusion beginning to replace her earlier composure. "What are you talking about?" But he wasn't listening to her anymore. He was staring at the man standing quietly before him. "You were there," he said, almost to himself. "That night in Zurich." A subtle murmur passed through nearby guests. The man didn't interrupt. Her husband's expression shifted from uncertainty to disbelief. "You stayed with me," he continued, voice tightening. "You kept talking to me while everyone else just—" He stopped, because now it was undeniable. Standing in front of him, the man his wife had just dismissed over a chair, was Ozzy Osbourne, but not as a performer, not as a headline, as the man who had knelt on cold marble flooring years ago and refused to walk away. His wife's confidence flickered for the first time. "What night?" she asked, her voice no longer steady. Her husband turned toward her slowly. "The night I almost didn't come home." And for the first time that evening, the wealth in the room felt very small. The ballroom lights glowed warm and golden, but for him, the room had dimmed into something distant, like watching the present. Through a pane of glass fogged by memory, "The Zurich summit," he said quietly, eyes still fixed on the man before him. 5 years ago. A murmur rippled through the nearby tables. Guests leaned closer, sensing that what was unfolding was no longer social tension. It was something deeply human. His wife's posture stiffened. "You told me you collapsed. At the hotel," she said. "I did," he replied, "but not before the reception." His voice carried the weight of a moment he had never fully put into words. The memory returned in fragments first, flashes of light, sound, pressure. A private investment summit in Zurich, marble columns, floor-to-ceiling glass revealing the city's night skyline, crystal stemware clinking, conversations about markets, acquisitions, and future expansions. He remembered feeling slightly unsteady during a conversation near the atrium balcony. A tightness in his chest he dismissed as stress. A faint ringing in his ears. The room tilting just enough to feel wrong. He had excused himself. He never made it to the exit. "I remember the floor rising toward me," he said slowly. Or maybe I was falling toward it. The ballroom audience listened in complete stillness. "I heard people gasp," he continued. Chairs scraping, someone shouting for space. But space was exactly what he got. Space where help should have been. He remembered blurred silhouettes stepping backward instead of forward. The instinctive human reaction to crisis. Shock, hesitation, fear of doing the wrong thing. Phones appeared. Voices layered over one another. "Call emergency services. Does anyone know CPR? Don't move him." But no one knelt beside him. No one touched his shoulder. No one anchored him to consciousness. "I couldn't breathe," he said. "I thought, this is it." His wife pressed a hand to her mouth. Then, through the chaos, one figure moved differently, not away, toward him. "I heard boots against marble," he said, quick, decisive. A voice cut through the panic, low, steady, unmistakably calm. "Give him space, he needs air." Hands guided people back, not aggressively, but with authority born of certainty. Then the man was beside him, kneeling, close enough that he could focus on a face instead of the spinning ceiling. "Stay with me," the voice said. "You're not going anywhere." Remember thinking, "Why does he sound so calm?" He continued, his eyes glistening. Everyone else sounded afraid. The man loosened his tie, tilted his head to keep his airway clear, and kept speaking. Not about the emergency, but about ordinary things. Breathing, staying present, holding on. "He kept me anchored," he said, like he was refusing to let me drift away. Somewhere in the distance, sirens began to echo, but in that moment, The only sound that mattered was the steady voice refusing to let silence take over. I later learned he had called emergency services himself, he said. Gave them precise details. Stayed on the line while staying with me. He swallowed hard. He never left my side. The ballroom remained motionless. Dozens of powerful people now hanging on the memory of a moment when power meant nothing. When paramedics arrived, he continued, he helped them lift me onto the stretcher. And then, his wife whispered. He exhaled slowly. He tried to leave before anyone noticed. A few guests exchanged surprised glances. No press, no introductions, no announcement, he said. Just a man walking away after making sure I was alive. He turned toward the quiet figure standing before him now. I asked later who helped me, he said. No one knew. Some thought he was part of the venue staff. Others thought he was security. His voice softened. I only discovered the truth weeks later, when a photo surfaced online from someone in the crowd. He paused, emotion tightening, his throat. And I realized the man who stayed with me on that cold marble floor was Ozzy Osbourne. Silence filled the gala. Not the polite quiet of etiquette, but the reverent silence reserved for moments when truth arrives uninvited and rearranges everything across the table. The millionaire woman's confidence, so carefully composed, had vanished completely, because the man she had just dismissed over a chair had once refused to let her husband die alone. For a long moment, no one in the ballroom spoke. The chandeliers continued to glow. Glassware reflected pinpoints of light. Somewhere near the stage, a violinist quietly lowered her bow, unsure whether music still belonged in this moment. Her husband stood motionless, as if the memory had placed him back on that cold marble floor. Couldn't feel my hands, he continued, his voice softer now. My chest felt like it was being crushed from the inside. Every breath was shallow, like the air stopped halfway. Several guests shifted uneasily, drawn into the visceral reality of the moment. I remember thinking I needed to stay conscious, he said. But everything kept slipping away. He looked toward Ozzy again. You didn't let me slip. The older man shifted slightly, uncomfortable with the attention, but said nothing. He kept talking to me, the husband continued. Not about what was happening, about breathing, about staying present, about focusing on his voice. He closed his eyes briefly, recalling it. He told me to match his breathing. Slow, steadiest rhythm in the room. The ballroom audience listened, as if each inhale mattered. He placed his hand on my shoulder, firm enough that I could feel it through the panic, he said. Not forceful, grounding. Guests glanced at one another. Some swallowed hard. In that chaos, he continued, he was the only thing that felt steady. He described how Ozzy had directed bystanders without panic, asking someone to clear space, another to bring water, another to guide paramedics when they arrived. There was no shouting, no ego, no frantic urgency, only clarity. It was like he slowed the room down, he said. He paused, emotion catching in his throat. I later learned he had experienced medical emergencies around touring crews and understood how quickly confusion can cost a life. A faint murmur passed through the crowd. When the paramedics arrived, he didn't step aside like a spectator, the husband said. He briefed them calmly, explained how long I had been unconscious, told them when my breathing changed. That detail drew a sharp inhale from a nearby guest. They trusted him instantly, he added. He looked down at his hands. I remember being lifted onto the stretcher, the ceiling lights passing overhead in bright rectangles. I thought I might never see my family again. His wife's eyes filled with tears. But I could still hear him, he said. He walked beside the stretcher, still telling me to stay with him. He swallowed. He rode with us to the hospital. A collective breath moved through the room. He stayed until doctors took over, he continued. Answered their questions, made sure they understood exactly what had happened. And then, someone whispered from a nearby table. He left, the husband said. The single word hung in the air, No press. No waiting for thanks. No introductions, he said. He slipped out of the hospital before I regained full consciousness. He turned toward Ozzy once more. When I woke up hours later, I asked the nurse who had stayed with me, he said. She didn't know. The staff only knew that someone refused to leave until my vitals stabilized. He exhaled slowly. It took weeks before I discovered his identity. All eyes returned to the quiet figure near the table. Ozzy shifted his weight slightly, as if wishing the floor might absorb the attention. I wrote a letter, the husband continued. I never sent it. I didn't know if it would reach him, or if he even wanted to be reached. He looked around the ballroom, the donors, the executives, the social elite. I built deals worth hundreds of millions, he said. But I owed my life to a man who wanted no recognition for saving it. Silence deepened. And tonight, he said, voice tightening. He stood up from a chair rather than cause discomfort. For the woman whose husband he once refused to abandon. The words settled over the room like falling snow. His wife's hand trembled at her side. Power, status, and wealth, the currencies that had defined the evening, now felt painfully insignificant because the man she had dismissed over seating protocol had sat beside her husband in the back of an ambulance, ensuring his heart kept beating long enough to come home. The gala room felt unnaturally still. The clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversations, the soft hum of the violin, all of it had faded into background static. Every eye was on the small triangle of tension forming at the front. The millionaire woman, her husband, and the older man she had dismissed moments ago. Ozzy Osbourne. Her husband's expression had shifted, from disbelief to a quiet intensity. The weight of what he was about to reveal pressed on him. He knew that in just a few sentences, decades of assumptions, pride, and social hierarchy would be challenged. I need to explain something, he began, his voice low but carrying through the room. A few nearby guests leaned in, cameras trained, subtly on the trio. The millionaire woman's posture stiffened. Her smile no longer radiated control. It was a mask holding back unease. Explain what? She asked, her voice clipped but betraying a hint of tension. The husband inhaled slowly, his gaze steady on Ozzy. The man you just asked to move from his seat saved my life. There was a ripple, barely perceptible at first. Guests exchanged glances, unsure whether this was hyperbole or some grand exaggeration. But the husband's serious tone left no doubt. What do you mean? She asked, her words faltering slightly. He continued. Years ago, during a business summit in Zurich, I collapsed. There was no immediate help. People panicked. Phones rang endlessly. No one stepped in. But he did. All eyes shifted toward Ozzy. The older man remained calm, hands loosely folded. He did not deny it, nor did he boast. I remember, her husband said, being on the marble floor, fading in and out of consciousness and hearing his voice telling me to stay with him. He kept me focused, breathing, alive. When paramedics arrived, he stayed with me, ensured I was stable, and left quietly before anyone could notice. No press, no recognition, just humanity. A hush fell over the room. Even the waitstaff paused, frozen mid-step. Several guests exchanged incredulous looks, realizing that the casual dismissal of a man in the front row had just become a dramatic revelation. Her husband turned slightly toward his wife. Do you understand now? He asked. Gently. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her confidence had so carefully built on wealth, status, and authority crumbled visibly. Her eyes darted between the man she had mocked and her husband, and the truth hit her with the weight of inevitability. The person she had dismissed in seconds was the very person who had saved her husband's life. The room seemed to contract. Around her, the chandeliers, the gold hues, the glittering guests, all meaningless in that moment. For the first time, she felt the fragility of social power against the permanence of real courage. Guests began whispering softly, absorbing the story, realizing the magnitude of the act. Some nodded subtly, Others looked at Ozzy with newfound respect. The air had changed. It was no longer about influence, donations, or appearances. It was about character.
Her husband's voice softened, almost breaking with emotion. He didn't want fame. He didn't want a thank you. He just did what was right. And tonight, he's here, quietly, showing the same humility he showed me that night. Her lips parted, finally forming words she hadn't expected herself to say. I had no idea. Ozzy's calm presence contrasted sharply with the tension. He gave a small shrug, almost apologetic for being the center of attention. It's all right, he said softly. I just did what anyone should do. The millionaire woman's head bowed slightly. Not in defeat, not yet, but in realization. She had misjudged a man by appearances alone. And the room had witnessed that moment of reckoning. Her husband reached for her hand, squeezing it gently, as if silently communicating, this was bigger than pride, bigger than money, bigger than status. Around them, cameras flashed discreetly. Socialites whispered. A few even nodded knowingly. The story had already begun to take on a life of its own, carrying a truth that could not be ignored. Heroism and integrity often arrive quietly, unnoticed, and without fanfare. And in that moment, the woman understood, for the first time, that real power didn't reside in wealth or control. It resided in character. The shock wasn't just for her. It was for everyone watching, a millionaire humbled, a room silenced, and a man of quiet integrity standing, unassuming, as the true measure of greatness. The ballroom had shifted. Forever. The room remained still, as if holding its collective breath. Every guest, every server, every photographer sensed the subtle shift, the invisible weight of a quiet truth pressing down on the glittering gala. It wasn't applause they were holding back, it was awe, respect, recognition of something far larger than social rank or wealth. Ozzy stood there, calm, almost unassuming. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't demanded attention. And yet, in the wake of the revelation, he held the room entirely captive. His presence was steady, a reminder that true greatness often doesn't announce itself. The millionaire woman finally broke the silence, her voice trembling slightly. I can't believe I misjudged you. I was wrong to dismiss you. Ozzy's eyes softened. There was no bitterness. No theatrical rebuke. Only quiet dignity. It's all right, he said. People make mistakes. Chairs get mixed up. Life happens. The simplicity of his words struck the audience harder than any drama or confrontation could have. No grand speech. No need for vindication. He hadn't acted for recognition then, and he didn't act for it now. The contrast between his humility and the woman's earlier condescension hung heavily in the air. Her husband stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder, and whispered something meant only for her ears. See the difference? That's real character. Some of the guests began to murmur softly, sharing the story quietly with neighbors. Phones were raised, recording subtle reactions, capturing expressions of awe and disbelief. This was a story bigger than wealth or fame. It was a story about courage, compassion, and quiet heroism. One of the event organizers finally approached, trying not to break the spell. Sir, would you like to say a few words? Ozzy shook his head, smiling faintly. No. There's nothing to add. I just did what anyone would do. His modesty made the audience lean in even closer, hanging on the truth rather than theatrics. In a room full of millionaires and philanthropists accustomed to public praise, this act of restraint spoke louder than any speech ever could. The millionaire woman lowered her gaze, her earlier arrogance replaced with reflection. She looked at her husband, then back at Ozzy. I underestimated what really matters, she admitted quietly, the first true humility she had expressed in public in years. The husband nodded, squeezing her hand. It's not about money, influence, or appearances. It's about who steps up when no one else does. Guests began to relax slightly, exhaling collectively. The tension that had gripped the ballroom gave way to something warmer, admiration. A quiet, reverent respect for a man who had chosen humanity over notoriety. Ozzy's response, calm, understated, unassuming, made the contrast even sharper. The rich, powerful, and elite of the room had all witnessed it. Wealth may buy influence, but integrity and courage command true respect. He shifted slightly, adjusting his glasses, allowing the room to settle back into itself. And then he did something simple, yet profoundly human. He offered a small, genuine smile at the couple. Not smug, not patronizing, but warm. The woman, finally processing everything, mirrored it with a nod. No words. No excuses. Just acknowledgement of a lesson learned the hard way. Some of the younger attendees, watching the exchange, began quietly taking notes, realizing the lesson wasn't in the gala, the seats, or the glittering crowd. It was in the quiet heroism and humility of a man who refused to be defined by fame or spectacle. The room had learned something rare that evening. Heroism doesn't need a stage. Humility doesn't need applause. And character? Well, character alone can silence a ballroom full of wealth, power, and pretense. Ozzy Osbourne had done just that. The room was quiet, but the silence was no longer tense. It had softened, filled instead with something rare and profound: understanding. In that quiet, golden-lit ballroom, the usual trappings of status, glittering gowns, polished tuxedos, expensive jewelry, seemed trivial. Power and wealth had lost their gravity. What remained was far more enduring: character. The millionaire woman shifted uncomfortably, finally letting her posture relax. Her hand rested on her husband's arm as if seeking reassurance. He gave her a small squeeze, a silent reminder that she was now seeing the world through a lens she hadn't known existed before, humility tempered with respect. Ozzy Osbourne stood quietly, not commanding attention, but effortlessly holding it. There was no boastfulness in his presence, only quiet strength. Every gesture he made, a small nod, a faint smile, reminded the audience why real heroes rarely announce themselves. They act, they serve, and they move on, leaving only the impact of their actions behind. Her husband turned toward the crowd, his voice steady but emotional. "We often measure greatness by fame, wealth, or influence," he said. "But tonight, we've witnessed something far rarer. We've seen courage, compassion, and integrity in action, without spectacle, without fanfare. We've seen what it means to truly step up when no one else will." Guests began to murmur softly, sharing glances and nods. Phones quietly recorded, capturing expressions of awe rather than staged smiles. This was not a story of social climbing or celebrity antics. It was a story of life, and of the people who save it quietly, without expectation. The millionaire woman finally looked at Ozzy. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mix of disbelief, gratitude, and newfound respect. I had no idea," she said, voice trembling. "All this time, I judged wrongly." Ozzy gave the faintest of smiles, his tone gentle. "It's all right. Everyone sees only what's in front of them. Life gives us opportunities to do the right thing, and sometimes, we don't even know the impact until later." She nodded, and for the first time that evening, her arrogance was gone. It was replaced by humility, an understanding that influence without character is hollow, and that wealth without conscience means very little. Around the room, the mood had shifted. The guests, CEOs, socialites, philanthropists, now saw a different measure of greatness. It wasn't measured by wealth, recognition, or the ability to command a room. It was measured by courage, compassion, and the willingness to act when it matters most. Her husband reached for Ozzy's hand, shaking it firmly. "Thank you," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of someone who had been given a second chance at life. Ozzy nodded, almost modestly. "No thanks needed," he said. "Just doing what anyone should do." The room absorbed the moment, and in that absorption, something viral was born. Not the kind that dominates headlines or trends for a day. This was the kind of story people shared because it mattered, a reminder that heroes often act quietly, invisibly, and with profound impact. As the gala resumed its rhythm, the story lingered like a shadow of truth over the chandeliers and champagne glasses. Whispers spread. "Did you hear what happened? He saved him. Ozzy Osbourne. And she dismissed him at first." It was a moment that would be retold, not for gossip, but for inspiration. A reminder that humility triumphs over arrogance, that action matters more than appearances, and that character is the rarest currency of all. And in the center of it all, Ozzy Osbourne remained quietly himself, unassuming, gracious, and quietly heroic. The applause that would eventually come was not for fame, but for humanity. And in that ballroom, the world seemed a little brighter, a little kinder, and a little more aware that the people who matter most are not always the ones with the loudest voices. Because sometimes, the greatest story isn't the one told on stage, but the one lived quietly, and revealed at the perfect moment. The end.